October 29, 1929. The trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange is pure chaos. Grown men are screaming, weeping, tearing at their collars as the numbers on the board fall faster than anyone can read them. Fortunes built over entire lifetimes are evaporating by the minute. This is the single worst day in the history of American money, the day the Great Depression is born. And in the middle of all of it, one man is calm. He sits at his desk, watching the very same numbers that are destroying everyone around him, and to his brokers he says just 3 quiet words: let it come. Because while the rest of the world is being wiped out, this man is doing the exact opposite of the crowd. And in a matter of days, he is going to become one of the richest people on the planet. And then, just as dramatically, it is going to destroy him. His name was Jesse Livermore. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly what he was doing at that desk, the one cold rule he understood that almost nobody else did, and why that same rule has quietly made a tiny handful of people rich in every disaster for the last 700 years. You'll also see the price Livermore paid for it, because this is not a get-rich story. Not really, because every fortune has a story, and some of the biggest are born in other people's ruin. Here's the thing nobody says out loud about a financial collapse: the money doesn't actually disappear. When a market crashes, when a currency dies, when an economy burns to the ground, that wealth doesn't vanish into thin air. It moves, it transfers, violently, from the many who panic to the few who keep their heads. It's one of the most important ideas in this entire video, so let me say it plainly. In a crisis, wealth is not destroyed so much as it changes hands. The factory still stands after the crash. It just has a new owner who paid pennies for it. The land is still there after the plague. It just belongs to someone new. The panic is the exact moment ownership changes, and the calm few are the ones it changes to. This is ancient. Long before Wall Street existed, the same rule was already running. After the Black Death wiped out a third of Europe, a story we told in another video, a few surviving peasants used their suddenly valuable wages to buy the land of the dead for almost nothing, and their grandchildren ended up richer than the lords who'd once owned them. 6 centuries later, in 1920s Germany, a man named Hugo Stinnes watched the worst hyperinflation in history destroy everyone's savings, and instead of holding money, he borrowed it and bought real things: mines, factories, ships. While the country starved, he became its richest man. Different centuries, different disasters, the exact same rule, but nobody ever followed it more boldly, or paid for it more brutally, than the man sitting calmly at that desk in 1929. So let me tell you about him properly. Jesse Livermore was not born rich. He started life at 14 as a boy chalking stock prices onto a board in a brokerage office, earning a few dollars a week. But as he stood there copying those numbers, hour after hour, he noticed something the grown men around him missed: the prices moved in patterns. The market, he realized, was not really about companies. It was about people, about fear and greed, and the way a crowd behaves when money is on the line. By 16, he had left the chalkboard and started betting his own money in the backroom betting shops of the day. And he was frighteningly good at it. He had one gift above all others: he could feel a panic coming before it arrived. In 1907, when a financial panic tore through Wall Street, Livermore bet against the market and made over $1 million in a single day. A staggering fortune at a time when a comfortable house cost a few thousand. The newspapers started calling him the boy Plunger. He traded unlike almost anyone around him. He didn't care about rumors or tips or what the morning papers claimed a company was really worth. He would sit for hours reading the ticker tape, that endless ribbon of prices clicking out of the machine, waiting to feel the precise moment the crowd's mood turned. He kept his own private rules, written in his own hand, and the times he lost everything were almost always the times he broke them. He used to say that the big money was never made in the buying or the selling. It was made in the waiting, in the patience to sit still and do absolutely nothing, sometimes for weeks, until the market finally showed its hand. But Livermore also had a fatal flaw, and hold on to it, because it's the whole tragedy of this story. He couldn't stop. He made and lost several fortunes before he was 40. He'd get it gloriously, brilliantly right, then get reckless, overreach, and lose everything all over again. He was a man who could read the whole world but couldn't quite read himself. And by 1929, he was rich once more, and watching the most insane market he had ever seen. To understand what he did next, you have to understand how crazy America had become. Through the 1920s, the stock market had risen roughly 5 times over in just 6 years. Everybody was in, not only the wealthy but waiters, taxi drivers, ordinary families. And here's the truly dangerous part: people weren't investing money they had, they were investing money they'd borrowed. Brokers would let you buy stock by putting down less than a third of the price and lending you the rest. By 1929, the total of all that borrowed money had grown larger than every dollar actually circulating in the entire country. The whole market was a balloon, inflated with debt and blind hope. People quit steady jobs to trade full-time. Fortunes were being made on paper every single week, and everyone had a brother-in-law or a barber who had just doubled his money. To doubt any of it, to even suggest it might end, made you sound like a crank and a pessimist, a fool who simply didn't grasp that this time was different. It is always, always different, right up until the moment it isn't. There's a famous story from that autumn that captures it perfectly. A wealthy financier was getting his shoes shined, and the shoeshine boy started giving him stock tips. And the financier went straight back to his office and started selling everything, because he said, when the shoeshine boy is in the market, there's no one left to buy. When the least informed person has already bought in, the only direction left is down. Livermore felt the same thing in his bones. A crowd this certain, this greedy, this drunk on borrowed money, was a crowd standing on the edge of a cliff. So he did the loneliest thing in all of finance. He bet against everyone. Quietly over weeks, he built an enormous position that would only pay off if the entire market collapsed, a massive wager on catastrophe. And for a while, the market kept climbing, and the optimists laughed at him. Think about the nerve that takes. Picture sitting there with your own fortune on the line, the entire world insisting every single day that you are wrong, watching the thing you bet against keep rising. Most people simply cannot withstand that pressure. They cave, they join the crowd, they buy back in at the top. Livermore didn't. He just waited. For weeks he lived inside that pressure. Every morning, the market opened higher, and every morning his bet looked a little more like madness. Even his own brokers doubted him. But Livermore had learned something across 30 years of reading crowds. The louder and more certain the optimism becomes, the closer the end actually is. He wasn't guessing. He was listening for a sound only he seemed able to hear, the sound of a crowd that had finally run completely out of caution. Then, at the end of October 1929, the balloon popped. It began on a Thursday, the 24th, the day they would call Black Thursday. Prices cracked, then plunged, and a wave of raw terror swept across the trading floor. A group of the most powerful bankers in America pooled their money and tried to prop the market back up, buying stocks in a dramatic show of confidence. For a weekend, it almost seemed to work. Then Monday came. Then Tuesday, Black Tuesday, the 29th, and the floor gave way completely. Over those 2 days alone, the market collapsed by roughly 25%. The panic Livermore had predicted arrived exactly as he had seen it coming, and it did not stop. It would keep falling until the market had lost 89% of its value. Banks failed by the thousands. Fortunes built over lifetimes vanished in a single afternoon. Within a few years, 1 in 4 Americans would be out of work. An entire decade of misery, the Great Depression, was opening up beneath the country's feet. And Jesse Livermore, sitting at his desk, murmuring, "Let it come," was on the other side of all of it. As the market collapsed, his bet paid off on a scale that is almost impossible to imagine. When the dust finally settled, Livermore had made around $100 million, roughly $1.5 billion in today's money. Possibly the most profitable few weeks any trader has ever had in history. And here is the part that should sit uneasily with you. While Livermore's wealth multiplied, the country around him was sliding into the worst decade of its modern life. Soup kitchens, bread lines stretching around the block, families on the road with everything they owned strapped to the roof of a car. The distance between Jesse Livermore and the average American in 1930 was almost beyond comprehension, and he had crossed it in a matter of weeks by betting on their ruin. Stop and put yourself in that chair for a moment. The entire world is in free fall. Men you know are being ruined, and you are quietly becoming one of the richest people alive, precisely because you had the nerve to do the opposite of everyone else. That is the rule, in its purest and coldest form. If this story is gripping you the way it grips me, take a second to subscribe and drop a like. It genuinely helps the channel grow. This is exactly what we do here. The booms, the busts, and the people on both sides of them. But I told you this wasn't really a get-rich story. Here's why. Remember Livermore's fatal flaw, the recklessness that had wiped him out before? The crash made him a legend, and one of the richest men in the world. And then the very rule that made him turned on him. Within about 5 years, Jesse Livermore had lost almost the entire $100 million. All of it. The same nerve that let him bet against the whole world, that fearless, almost superhuman appetite for risk, was the exact thing that ruined him once the world went calm again, and the easy panics were gone. He kept gambling, he kept getting it wrong, and the greatest fortune ever made in a crash simply drained away. It's a strange, almost unbearable kind of tragedy. The very discipline that had made him, the patience, the iron nerve, the ability to wait, seemed to abandon him the moment the world stopped panicking. In calm, rising markets there were no great crashes to read, no terrified crowds to bet against. And Livermore without a crisis was like a brilliant general with no war left to fight. He spent the rest of his life chasing the feeling of 1929, and it never came back the same way. The man who had timed the worst collapse in history perfectly died, a little over a decade later, broke and broken. The single greatest trade ever made, and it still ended in ruin. That is the part the get-rich-quick crowd will never tell you. The collapse doesn't just hand out fortunes. It hands them out, and then, more often than not, it takes them right back. Remember Hugo Stinnes? He built a German empire on the dying mark, and his heirs lost the entire thing within a few years of the inflation ending. Livermore made $100 million and lost it. For every winner we remember, there were thousands who tried the exact same move, got it slightly wrong, and were quietly destroyed. We only ever tell the stories of the ones who won. So what do you actually take from all this? Not the reckless version, not go bet everything on the next crash. That is the road that ended Livermore. The real lesson is quieter, and it's the one this channel keeps circling back to. Wealth is rarely destroyed in a crisis. It is transferred, and it isn't only the giant once-in-a-generation crashes. This is happening, quietly, all the time. Every time inflation eats away your savings while someone who owns property watches its value climb. Every time a market panic lets a calm buyer pick up solid assets for half of what they were worth a month before. It happened again in living memory. In 2008, when the housing market that everyone swore could only rise collapsed and dragged the world economy down with it, and a small handful of people who had bet against the madness walked away with billions. Some of them had spent years being mocked for that bet, doubting themselves, watching the market laugh in their faces, right up until the moment they were proven catastrophically, spectacularly right. Exactly like the lonely man at the desk in 1929. Same euphoria, same crowd, same rule, 700 years after the Black Death. Which side of that transfer you end up on is decided long before the panic ever hits, by whether you understand what holds real value when everything is on fire, and whether you can keep your head while everyone around you is losing theirs. The crowd will always buy at the top and panic at the bottom. It always has. And as long as it does, there will always be a quiet few on the other side of the table. A peasant buying empty fields, a tycoon buying mines with worthless paper, a lonely man at a desk in 1929 murmuring "let it come," keeping their heads, doing the opposite, and inheriting the wreckage. Just never forget what it cost the man who did it best of all. So tell me in the comments, if you had been in Jesse Livermore's chair in 1929, certain the crash was coming, your own money on the line, the entire world calling you a fool, would you have had the nerve to bet against everyone? Or would you have been part of the crowd? Be honest with yourself. I read every single comment, and if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Fortunes in Ruin, because every fortune has a story, and most of them in the end return to ruin. I'll see you in the next one.